Got it.
Okay, hello, and welcome to your District 9 2026 budget meeting. As you can see, we have a tremendous amount of city staff here, and that's because Jay Chapa is going to lead us off, but we want to make sure that any questions you have about what's in this budget or what we're doing, you're able to get answered tonight. So I just want to personally thank city staff for being out here today, giving up your evening to come make sure everybody gets their questions answered. And most importantly, I want to take the opportunity to thank all of our residents that have shown up to learn and educate yourself about the budget. Our city is only as good as you make it. And so by showing up to these meetings and listening to what we've got going on, giving us feedback and making sure that we're providing the services that you are looking for is really vital to make sure that the city does everything that it should for our residents. So thank you for being part of our civic engagement. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jay Chapa, and he's going to tell you all about his first budget as city manager.
Well, thank you, Councilwoman Beck. Good evening, and thank you all for being here today. As she mentioned, we do want to get your feedback or have your questions. So it's going to start off. I'm going to start this off with a little video. The video kind of is a synopsis of the budget. And then we have a little PowerPoint presentation. And actually, Christiane Simmons is going to go through the PowerPoint presentation. And then I'll be here along with her and all the various staff members. If you ask a really detailed question that specific to one department that are here to help answer those. But we do want to hear your feedback, and we want to be able to answer your questions. As was mentioned, this is my first budget as a city manager. Although it's my 26th budget with the city of Fort Worth. I started off as a budget analyst a long time ago, and then worked my way through the city in different departments. So with that, I'm going to kick this off. And I think I just hit this button. No? There it is.
Fort Worth reflects smart, strategic growth, benefiting from a fast-growing economy, safe and clean neighborhoods, and a high quality of life for all residents. This year, we reached a historic milestone, 1 million residents strong. With that growth comes opportunity to invest wisely and plan sustainably for the future. For fiscal year 2026, the city is proposing a $3.09 billion budget, including a $1.1 billion general fund, focused on 5 city council priorities: community safety, infrastructure, community investment, economic development, and responsible growth. We are enhancing community safety by adding neighborhood police officers, providing full-year funding for our brand new EMS service, and launching a new emergency management and communications department. And just as safety is essential, so is the infrastructure that keeps our city moving. We're prioritizing street maintenance and 2 major water treatment facility projects, while strengthening staffing to ensure crucial infrastructure projects are delivered on target. Our neighborhoods remain at the heart of our plan, supported by strengthening the priority repair and neighborhood improvement programs, expanding the mobile toolshed program to assist more homeowners, and adds resources to our animal shelters. By strengthening the places we live, we also lay the foundation for a thriving local economy. To boost economic growth, we're launching a small business development program and upgrading the Will Rogers Complex and Convention Center. We're delivering for today and planning for tomorrow. This is reflected by updating service fees for water, stormwater, solid waste, and environmental protection to improve flood mitigation and ensure sustainable operations. And through PAYGO funding, a small but powerful portion of your property tax, we're increasing investment in street and park maintenance. Over the past decade, Fort Worth has kept budget growth in check, thanks to consistent tax rate reductions. The proposed tax rate of 67 cents is a decrease from last year. A typical household with a homestead exemption will pay less in city taxes this year. Out of the 67-cent property tax rate, over 52 cents funds operations and maintenance, and 14 cents goes towards debt. We maintain a fiscally responsible strategy and a strong credit rating, enabling the city to fund upcoming bond programs. The City Council will review the budget throughout August, with a final vote on September 16th.
Oh, hi. Good evening again. Christiane Simmons with the Fort Worth Lab, which is the city department that, among other things, develops and manages the budget. So happy to be with you this evening and share some budget highlights, which the video covered some, and we'll go into a bit more detail. The council member said this, but thank you so much for engaging with us in this process. We are always looking for different ways to engage, and we continue to look at that for next year too, earlier engagement and different opportunities. But I personally like the public meetings, and it's been a real joy to go out into the community and talk about the budget. Okay. So I have a short-ish deck, sort of more brief than last year if you were here last year. And we'll save questions till the end, so just note your questions as you go. And if you submitted questions online, we'll also have time to get to those. All right. So fiscal year 26 budget themes, of course, as we begin to develop the budget each year, a number of themes emerge. Some are the same sort of year to year, and then some are different. The increase in population growth, as you're well aware, is kind of an overarching umbrella that we're dealing with constantly. We hit 1 million residents, like the video said, in July of 2024. And so with that growth comes a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of complexity and challenge. And so as we build the budget, we're trying to do that balancing act throughout. The property tax, as the city's biggest source of revenue, is also always top of mind. And as engaged residents, you might know that this year, Tarrant Appraisal District changed their kind of reappraisal plan, the way that they appraise residential properties that have a homestead. And so we weren't quite sure what that reappraisal plan would do in terms of our values, where we set the rate and build the budget from. And so we, from an early stage, were modeling a lot of those scenarios with city management and with council, thinking we would have really constrained revenues. There's also lots of legislative stuff in that regard as well. So anyway, we were modeling a lot of different scenarios going on, and you'll get to see the fruits of a lot of that labor here. And then fiscal responsibility is certainly a top council priority. And especially with Jay being new in the seat, even though not new to the city, he really wanted to see department heads take a surgical look at their budget, kind of look from the beginning and he set a 1% target reduction at the beginning of the budget process. So just an immediate belt tightening, again, because of constrained revenues, and just wanting to make sure that in a big budget, there can be pockets sometimes of inefficiency, and we want to make sure to look at those annually. We also every year look at fee increases. We certainly did that this year, and you'll see again some of that. The video talked also about PAYGO. That's pay as you go, a portion of your property tax rate that goes to cash funded capital maintenance. We definitely did not want to reduce the amount that we're setting aside for cash funded capital maintenance. That's in lieu of issuing debt for things like street maintenance and park maintenance and bridges and some of that stuff. So bridge maintenance, that is. And so we did not want to reduce that portion of the tax rate. We also didn't want to reduce the portion of the tax rate that's for debt service. Same concept, but thinking about long-term growth, we really need to reserve debt capacity for bond programs and big capital projects. So you heard some of this in our little marketing video, but this isn't really a budget year where we're adding a lot of new things. It was more about sustaining and maintaining our core services and really keeping growth and priorities in mind. But we were able to sustain, the service levels in police, fire, and then the first full year of acquisition of EMS. That was a big deal for the fiscal year 26 conversation. So police, fire, and EMS at top of mind. PAYGO we talked a bit about, and then community investment as well through programs like the Housing Priority Repair Program, the Mobile Tool Shed Program, which we'll talk about. Those were all intentional decisions made through the budget process and through Jay's first budget as city manager. And then looking inward as well, we're in the middle of some different workforce initiatives, one of which is a pay study. So we're really looking to make sure that we're competitive with the market when it comes to paying our own employees. We don't do across the board raises or market raises. We do performance raises. So we wanted to make sure we were staying in line with market and still rewarding good performance from city employees. So the City Council actually has 5 adopted strategic priorities. And sometimes in this graphic, if you see it, there's also like a line underneath that says fiscal responsibility. So I just want to call that out again, that's a high priority. But the council adopted a resolution last year naming these 5 sort of broad categories as their top priorities. And so in all the decisions, but certainly in the budgeted decisions where budgeted resources should lead to outcomes, right? They should line up under one or more priority. So community safety, these are not really in order, but certainly community and safety and infrastructure are the ones we hear often about at these meetings and really year round. But full year funding for EMS, so you're likely aware that the city took on the role this year in July of ambulance provider. That they used to be MedStar. It's now the City of Fort Worth through the fire department. And so that went live on July 1st. So we've had about, we're going to have a quarter of activity this fiscal year. But next year is the first year of full funding and full activity. And so that was a big budget item this year that we were balancing against. We also officially began an emergency management and communications department, established them as a department for the first time. It's not necessarily that the functions are new, but they are more consolidated and more visible. So you think about, World Cup planning and other emergencies that, that might arise, as well as communication. So like 911 response, and those are together in a department kind of carved out from police, fire, and the emergency management functions that already existed in the city. And then on the police side, the police department did a beat study over this last year. As you can imagine, the boundaries of the beats kind of evolve and change as the city grows. And they added 12 new beats. And so they requested, and we were able to add additional neighborhood police officers for those beats. That's 8. Because of the boundaries that kind of redistributed, we needed 8 additional NPOs. So we did that in this budget. And then Fort Worth ISD also requested school resource officers. Many of you might know we split those with the school district, and so it's like a 50-50 split for the average SRO, and so we also did that in this budget. That was just 2 that we got. Okay, infrastructure. So I think the number one thing that we hear about, and in our last community survey, certainly the number one thing was street maintenance. And that may be the case for you as well. This budget really prioritizes street maintenance again, kind of for the second year in a row in a couple of ways. The first is that just more dollars to street maintenance. So we fund that in PAYGO, so that portion of the tax rate that's for cash funding capital. And so there are more dollars sent over for street maintenance in the fiscal year 26 budget. But the other thing is that in the fiscal year 26 budget, we have allocated some dollars to continue studying what a street maintenance fee would look like. So you may have been engaged through council activity on, am I good? Yeah. Some of those conversations that they arose a little bit last year and then it died off for a bit. There is some council interest and community interest in what a street maintenance fee would look like what would we get for it, who would pay for it, how would that be set up. So that's something that we want to study in fiscal year 26 to see about implementing that in the future. We also added additional personnel for capital project delivery, and this may not affect you so much day to day, but as far as efficient turnover of capital projects, delivering them on time and on schedule and budget, sometimes the city outsources inspections or engineering, and a couple of departments this year said, I think we could do that more efficiently in-house and more cheaply in-house. And so we are going to let them try that this year. It's not in the general fund, but it's in some of the capital projects related funds. So we're excited about that employee investment and hopefully better results. And then there are a couple of really big water projects in the fiscal year 26 budget, both the Eagle Mountain Water Treatment Plant expansion that's been planned for a long time, as well as the Marys Creek Water Reclamation Facility. Another important priority is community investment. So this is what you think of as like homes and neighborhoods and maybe parks and libraries. So this budget expands the housing priority repair program. And we call it the housing one because it has to do with home ownership and really being able to keep you in your home if you have an emergent priority that maybe you don't have the financial means. So this is often a senior citizen use program. There's sometimes a backlog, kind of a lot, a backlog. It's a $2 million program. We added a $500,000 to that budget, so we increased it quite a bit. And so we're hoping that can help more folks retain home ownership in those kinds of emergency situations. We also got a new code director I think it was this year. Honestly, it feels like it's been a while. He's like so much. He's in the back right there. You can ask him all your code questions, Brian Doherty. He came from Arlington, and in Arlington they had a mobile tool shed program. And so he brought that idea, and we piloted it in a couple of neighborhoods this year, and we've had a lot of great response. So it's what it sounds like. It's a mobile tool shed. So if you don't have a lawnmower or a weed eater or the kind of equipment that you need to keep your yard tidy and not a code violation, it takes away some of that burden and will allow you to have that equipment brought to you, use it, move it on. And so we're going to expand that program next year. We also increased resources for code in animal shelters, particularly for animal shelters. We have some positions, particularly the kennel technicians, that are very difficult to retain. As you can imagine, that's just work that there's a lot of turnover. And so we have some contractual services in this budget that are like temporary labor positions where we can keep those functions going in the event that there's a lot of attrition in those positions, as we've seen historically. This budget continues the neighborhood improvement program, one neighborhood for next year. And then finally, in 2027, we're opening a new library in the far northwest part of the city. But at the end of this coming budget year, yay, yeah, we got a yay. At the end of this budget year, we have to staff that library, hire the people, start to train them in the library and stuff. So that is a fiscal year 26 budget milestone to begin to staff that library. There are a couple of items for economic development in addition to just continuing our economic development, departmental activities. The first is an expanded partnership with our local chambers to develop a small business development program. So that's the Metropolitan Black Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, and the Downtown Chamber, like the Fort Worth Chamber. And we're excited about those partnerships to support small businesses in Fort Worth. You may have heard some about that over the summer through some council activity and action. We're also funding a new, a refreshed economic development strategic plan. It's been a while since we did that, and we have a new director coming on board, so we thought, it's a good time to look at those strategies around economic development in Fort Worth. And then on the public event side, Will Rogers and the Convention Center both have big projects in fiscal year 26. The Convention Center's doing its big expansion. You'll see that when we look at the capital slide, you'll see a big bump for public events. And then we just are also continuing investment in initiatives for economic development agreements. Last council priority, but not least, is kind of a little bit of a catch-all category, but it's just about responsible growth, which of course can mean a lot of things. So a couple of highlights here. We'll continue advancing the 2050 comprehensive plan. So this looks at what do we want Fort Worth to be in 2050. It's a land use plan. It really has all the departments in it. We haven't refreshed it since 2023, but we haven't done a whole refresh since the very first one, which was like 2000. And so that is already happening. Some of you as engaged folks may have been part of some of that engagement. Last year as it occurred, we did some public forums and meetings. We will do more of those in October in conjunction with bond planning. And so that will be a good, interesting opportunity to engage. But in 2026, we're funding the comprehensive plan creation on a continual basis. And then it's not as interesting of a topic maybe, but we're adding vehicle and equipment funding because obviously as we grow, our fleet ages and we want to make sure that we're being efficient with our city services that use fleet and equipment. So we have quite a backlog. We have a lot of vehicles and equipment that are eligible to replace. So trying to take a bit of a bite out of that backlog. I mentioned the pay study. So the city right now is engaged in a pay study, not for civil service, but almost for everybody else. There's like hundreds of job classifications that are being studied. And that's, again, we have to recruit and retain employees in a really competitive job market, both with other large cities, but even just in Dallas-Fort Worth, even with the private sector. So just studying, there's a number of jobs at the city that are really hard to fill or hard to retain folks. So we kind of want to see, why is that? Is it about pay? Is it classification, title, all those things? So that study was funded last year, but we expect results in like April. And so there's a bucket in this budget that will allow us to begin to address whatever the findings of that study are. We expect it to be a multi-year implementation, but we do have a little bit of seed money to get us started in fiscal year 26. And then we'll talk a little bit more about fee structures as we go forward, but there are some fee adjustments as well. All right. So property tax. We have just a few slides on property tax. Again, city's biggest revenue source in the general fund. In fiscal year 25, you see at the top, our budget was built on $121.9 billion in taxable value. The city sits in 4 appraisal districts, so it's Tarrant, Parker, Denton, and Wise. The large majority of that, as you can imagine, is in Tarrant, about like 5% or something. And so that's why we were really closely watching, TAD's activities and their adopted reappraisal plan for residential homes. So we weren't exactly sure, particularly what the first little arrow in growth would look like. We were projecting that in some scenarios to be almost flat, even negative, because we knew that TAD, if you protested your value, even if you didn't get reappraised, they might still drop your value. So we just weren't exactly sure. It was a little unprecedented for us. But when our values came in at the end of July, we actually had some existing growth value that was 3.4%, as you can see here. And so that was good news for us. We were planning to be a bit more constrained than that. So we were happy to see that number. And then the new construction, 2.5% is a pretty good number for us too. That's pretty well in line with what we've seen over the last few years, 2 to 3% in new construction value. Based on state law, we can only capture 3.5% of existing growth anyway. And so we're kind of bumping up against that cap there. So all that to say, for fiscal year 26, our taxable value is $129 billion. So based on that, we, kind of run a number of scenarios about the rate. And so as you saw in the video, we're recommending a tax rate reduction. It's a 1/4 cent reduction from 67.25 cents per $100 valuation to 67 cents. And on the right-hand side, I know that's a little small, but this is the way that tax rate breaks out. So 67 cents on the bottom, that's debt service. So that's that portion of the rate that supports our debt and also preserves our debt capacity, going forward. That's really important for our bonds and all of that. And so I mentioned we didn't want to reduce that or mess with it. And then the little top branch breaks into the O&M rate, kind of breaks into 2 more branches. So the first on the top right, 45 cents, that supports the general fund. And the general fund's the biggest operating fund in the city. It supports things like police, fire, parks, libraries, transportation, kind of some of the things you'd think of as like core city services. And then the bottom portion is capital. That's pay-go. So that's that 7.25 cent that we dedicate for cash funded capital maintenance. So that's the way the 67 cent sort of breaks out. And that leads us to the total operating budget, almost $1 billion. That's not all the general fund. This is all of our operating funds, kind of from top to bottom. You see there, general fund on top is the biggest, $1.1 billion, about 4.5% growth in the general fund. We'll talk about some of the main drivers there. But you also see a couple of other different groups of funds. So special revenue has CCPD, EMS, culture and tourism. We'll highlight a few of these that I think you'll be interested in. Enterprise funds, we'll talk a bit about. That's water, solid waste, stormwater. Those are the funds that operate more like a business. Internal service funds is the other, I think, little biggie there outside of debt service. And those are funds that support internal city activity. So departments that do work for other departments and interdepartmentally bill. So like fleet. So like if the fleet shop does work for, fire or whatever, then they bill it out. So general fund, biggest revenue sources here, property tax and sales tax. We talked a bit about property tax. So sales tax, kind of the other one. Between those two, they're like 80% of the general fund's revenue. So we watch those super closely. Sales tax, we've been in like double-digit sales tax growth a bit over the last 10 years. We're not exactly in that spot anymore. And so we're trying to strike the right balance of being conservative but realistic. So not being like too conservative and then having a lot of money that like drops the fund balance at the end of the year, but also not way overshooting. So we think sales tax will grow about 4%. And then the expenses, this may not be the most interesting view of expenses since it's not like at the department level, but really what you should see here is that in the general fund, salary and benefits makes up about 72-ish% of the total expenses in the general fund. So pretty people heavy. And of course, a lot of that, 50% of the general fund is police and fire. So we talked about the 4.5% growth, and that 4.5% is $48 million in growth. So there are a number of things that take up or eat up that growth, even like as the budget process is beginning, that are contractual obligations or decisions we make from the beginning. So I want to talk through just a few of those, and we're moving right along, I promise. So of the 48 million, about almost 70% of that is public safety related growth. So the first thing is EMS. So the council made the decision to take on the ambulance provision service, the EMS, from MedStar. The goal, of course, is improve patient outcomes and efficiency and service response times and all of that. You've heard, I think, probably a lot about that over the last year. But EMS it's not set up as an enterprise fund. It can't quite cover its own expenses. As you can imagine, in healthcare and medical billing and stuff, it's not exactly a one-for-one. And so while the goal may be to get us there, and we're certainly exploring some ways to close that gap, right now, EMS is a special revenue fund, which means that its revenues are dedicated to itself, but it needs help from the general fund in order to balance. So the new EMS budget is about $89 million, and its revenues are about $69 million. So that creates that $20 million subsidy from the general fund over to the new EMS fund. And then the other two bullets under public safety have to do with police and fire raises. So we're in bargaining agreements with the Police Officers Association and then the fire collective bargaining group. And so as part of that, they come out with a schedule of pay increases for our civil service personnel. So these are what they equate to for fiscal year 26 to keep those increases that we're contractually obligated to pay on schedule. The middle section is about workforce. So I mentioned pay for performance. That's the mechanism by which city employees that are not civil service get raises, and they're tied to performance goals, and there's a range that employees can get. And then I've talked a little bit about that pay study that we're in the middle of. So I mentioned the bucket that we have set aside. So that's the bucket that we had set aside in the recommended budget. And then PAYGO, that $4.5 million, that was after the values came in, and we have to send the right amount over to PAYGO to equal that 7.25 cents. So that's some additional PAYGO growth there. So moving out of the general fund and into the enterprise funds is kind of the next big category of the enterprise funds. These are those that they operate more like a business. So they're user-based. So the user fees or charges pay for the expenses, right? So the biggest of these is water and wastewater, and you live in the city and you pay a water bill. The water department is not just a city function; it's a regional utility, and as you can imagine, with our rapid growth, they have a lot of capital outlay. They have contractual services that have increases, so their growth is about 9% for fiscal year 26. Most residential customers that have typical usage are not going to see a rate increase on the water side, but they will see a slight increase on the wastewater side. I'll show you that in a moment on like a mock bill. The next biggest enterprise fund is solid waste. There's also a rate increase proposed for solid waste. They haven't had one since 2002 or 3. It's been a long time. And so we're really looking for sustainability of that service and of that fund, especially as we look about 10 years out. Our landfill will be at end of life, and it takes a long time to plan from a siting perspective and from an environmental perspective for that closure and what we do next. And so the solid waste fee increase is tied to many of those things, as well as our contracts with waste management. And then stormwater also continuing their capital channel restoration plan. So their fee increase is directly tied to that project delivery. And then we have parking and airports, which don't typically touch kind of a typical resident day to day. And then I'll just touch quickly on special revenue funds. So most of you are familiar with CCPD. That is funded by a 50-cent sales tax. Let me level set. Special revenue funds don't really operate as much like a business as the enterprise fund. Some of them, they adopt balanced budgets. And so, their revenue is just dedicated to that function, but it's not necessarily that it can cover itself. And so CCPD is the 50-cent sales tax is its dedicated revenue source. And that's been adopted every 5 years until the last election, which was in 2020, which was a 10-year adoption. So they're about midway through. Their budget is growing modestly, 2.6%. That includes those new NPOs and SROs. And then we have public events, which is actually kind of a roll-up of a lot of funds that are culture and tourism related, funded primarily by hotel occupancy tax as well as revenue sharing with airport parking. Then EMS, you see no history there in fiscal year 25, but the brand new budget set up $89 million in fiscal year 26. And remember, $20 million of that is coming from the general fund as that subsidy. And then environmental is the other big one here that has a fee on your water bill. And that has to do, some of their fee increase this year is tied to, actually a lot of it's tied to new Upspire cleaning crews. Some of you are familiar with the Upspire crews that help the camp clean up. And those have been a really popular and effective service. And so we'd like to bring, I think it's five more crews on. And so a 75-cent increase gets us there, as well as some capital planning for environmental. And then we don't want to leave out golf. There's golf and community tree planting as well. Some of our more minor, but still important special revenue funds. So this is that mock-up that I mentioned, and this will take me almost to the end. In the top row, you'll see the average taxable home value in the city. So this is a bit of a composite, a blend of our different appraisal districts, but that's the average home value that's taxable. So it already has a homestead exemption factored in. So if it looks funny, that might be why. And then you can see, so for fiscal year 26, $236,000 almost. Applying the 67-cent tax rate shows your average tax bill going down by about $20 because, again, Tarrant didn't reappraise, right? So your city portion of your bill would be dropping by $20 on average for this home value. And then on the bottom, you kind of see the rate or fee increases that I discussed throughout. So stormwater and then the water, wastewater, solid waste, and environmental. So a $20 tax bill decrease, and then resident charges going up on average about $4.75 a month. So the net impact is about $3 more a month when you offset those two, kind of tax bill down, water bill with those fees up. I mentioned the capital plan. So every time we do the operating budget, we also revisit our 5-year capital plan. It's like a rolling plan. So over the course of the next 5 years, we're expecting to expend $3.9 billion in capital. This is capital like debt. And this doesn't include yet the 2026 bond. So whatever you approve in the bond, if you approve things, then that will get factored in, the next time that we visit all of this. But you can see water has a big capital plan in fiscal year 26. Some of those capital projects we mentioned. And then I mentioned public events too. You'll see that their fiscal year 26 number is big, $551 million. And then it kind of tapers back off. And you'll see the rest there. So $1.4 billion in capital plan for fiscal year 26. And then pay-go, again, portion of the tax rate, 7.25. This kind of shows how each category grew from current year to next. So the point here is that TPW, that's streets in particular, they have more categories, but streets, they received really all the pay-go growth. And then we grew the other categories kind of by their standard growth, except we did give a little extra to parks too. But TPW getting the lion's share of the pay-go growth, again, because this budget really prioritizes street maintenance in response to what we hear the most from residents. So with all said and done, this is budget growth year over year. $3.6 billion in the current year, $4.5 almost billion in fiscal year 26, reflective of a fast-growing city. So we are doing these meetings all around. I think we have 3 more or 4 more. We have one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. So I think we'll be in District 5 on Wednesday. So you can certainly attend another meeting if you like, or tell somebody that you loved my presentation. it kept you awake on a Monday night. That's pretty good. And they're also live on the city's website, and we'll be able to share those as needed. We're trying to make sure we have live stream options always now. And then we're all leading up to public hearings next week. So those public hearings are on the tax rate and the budget are set for 5:30 next Tuesday on the 16th. And then the adoption of the budget, tax rate, fees, all of that will follow at the 6 p.m. meeting. So that's where we're going. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. And we're happy to have a discussion or answer questions. Thank you for your attention. Yes, and we do have to make you talk into the mic because of the live stream. So don't go like this to me, because they really would like you to talk into the mic so that the live stream catches it.
I attended the listening session for the new downtown library this week, I believe, last week. So where in the budget is the funding for the new downtown library? Because I've heard it's $6.5 million.
So it's not part of the operating budget, it's capital money, and those dollars were from the sale of the previous library, and so that's in a fund that's going to pay for that. So it's a capital fund separate from that. It's a project fund.
So what about, I've heard the history and genealogy library is going to be relocated to the city hall?
So the recommendation is, so as she mentioned, next month we're going to start our bond meetings, public meetings for the 2025 recommended bond. And part of that recommendation is to include funds to complete renovations of the downtown library, the old city hall, so that we can then be able to move the genealogy back into downtown where it's more accessible to more folks, and then ultimately reopen the seminary library because there's a big request from that. We heard. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
If it's a question or a ask.
Well,
So somebody mentioned roads early on, because we do have a lot of really poor quality roads. And some things don't always cost more money, but just require better workmanship. And Forest Park is a good example because it's in our neighborhood. It was totally repaved 5, 6, 7 years ago, immediately was torn up for some sort of construction projects. The workmanship on the redo was terrible, and it still is. We still suffer from it today. And the labor costs the same, probably, to have good work or bad work. And I know some of it is city employees and some of it is contractors. And nobody enforces quality workmanship from the contractors. So these are things I would like to see improved. These are just personnel issues in reality, the right people saying this is not a good job. And also recently, because the road, the striping had become nearly invisible, so you did a great job of striping and putting all the little reflectors in on a really bad road, which made no sense to me. So I'd like to see maybe we could figure out some way, and I'd love to be on any committee that deals with roads. Because I'm not an engineer, but I drive a car. And
did you stay at a Holiday Inn last night?
Yeah, just about.
That'd be the trifecta.
Okay, and then then the second one is about, which we didn't talk about at all, and that's the incentives that are given for a lot of any kind of building gets an incentive. Any company comes to town, some of them are huge. And who tracks? Where's the chart that says we gave this company $800,000 in incentives to do X, Y, and Z, and we'll claw it back if it doesn't happen, as opposed to giving the money after it happens, which is, when you have a contractor, you don't pay it all in advance.
So we don't give any money out in front.
Okay, so do we have a chart somewhere that says
Yes.
we gave this company $800,000 that we're going to hire 150 employees at an average wage of X?
Those incentives are all based only on the taxes that are created by the project. So if they don't show up,
You're saying that we're not actually giving them anything?
we're giving them after they build. They meet the requirements of, I'm just going to throw a hypothetical, $500 million in construction costs, 1,000 jobs, all those things are tied to it. Based on their actual performance, they build a $million project, they hire their folks, then the incentives start flowing on an annual basis off of the taxes only of their project, not of everybody else's existing taxes. So if it's a 40% tax abatement, they get a reduction of 40% because they met those things. If in the next year they drop, and there's performance based, so if they only did 800 jobs, they might lose 10 or 15% of that. So every project's different. Every project has a different contract. So the city's not giving them any money in the front end, typically. There are times when it's cash. It's a very small amount of money that we have. Fort Worth doesn't have a 4A or 4B sales tax like Arlington or Frisco or other cities, where say a company bringing their headquarters downtown to an existing building, and they're not making a whole lot of improvements, but we're competing with downtown Dallas, for instance, and Irving, and they want to just remodel. The city might provide, after they remodel, maybe $1 million in cash to help them with the remodel, but they're bringing their headquarters with 300 jobs that pay $200,000 a year, which has a big economic impact to the city. So that's the only time usually when we put cash in it.
Thank you.
Two questions. One's tax refunds. The federal or state gives us grants as citizens through our federal tax dollars, and they're applied to our local bond issues. So why would we not get a tax refund that the city of Fort Worth collects for a bond which we have voted for and budgeted out of our city taxes?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain that more?
I'm just telling you that's what happens.
The city collects a bond
From the federal government. They receive American Recovery money from the federal government for local use.
Right.
That money is being used to pay for bond programs.
No, not for bonds.
Yes, it is. I will show you.
Okay.
So, why should we not? Why, if the city of Fort Worth receives federal grants, why don't we get the tax refund as property owners?
The city received recovery dollars, ARPA dollars, to be used for projects and or initiatives in the city, and they had requirements. They're not eligible to provide individual payments.
But they were used for a bond issue in my neighborhood that we had already signed off on in 2018.
For a bond issue.
The 2018
we talk
bond
afterwards, 'cause
issue.
I don't know what
I know you
project.
do. I'm just trying to help.
Okay.
The 2018 bond issue did in lighting in the Pascal neighborhood for $600,000.
Right.
Okay? That was just completed in 24.
Right.
Okay. But that 600,000, where did it go? Because the federal government paid for the project.
I think it was supplemental. It ended up doing more than 600,000
No,
using
sir.
those federal dollars.
I tracked it. 40. I'm just.
No, I'm looking for the person that's.
It doesn't. Let me finish. Let me tell you what happened. 40 heads were put in. 40. Okay, and only 9 poles were replaced. Okay, $600,000 was the budget. So I can show you the numbers. I can show you what it cost, but the money was paid for. It wasn't more than $600,000. The actual cost was probably, if you bid it out, was $200,000, if that, maybe $150,000. Something happened between the $600,000 that was issued by the bond and the money paid by the federal government. There was not a cost increase.
I'd have to look into it.
Well, I mean, everybody's looked into it, from the city auditor.
I'm sure we can get you as detailed of information as you want on the ARPA funds. Those grant funds went to.
Here you go.
Oh, thank you. We can get you as detailed information as you want about the ARPA funds. Those funds, which is a grant,
I know it is.
went to a lot of different projects, sidewalks, signals, and then the money, and those projects were under budget, I believe, and we used some of that ARPA money to kind of make up shortfalls, and we had a lot more need than we had funding for at the time, and so there was a prioritization and council action that supported the use of those ARPA funds for those projects, but we have
all the details of where it all went, but that's not something I can give you specifics on right here.
Well, no one else has either. You can't, and other people cannot.
What's your contact information when we're...
Well, that's what happened last year.
I will follow.
Any other questions, comments?
No one will be surprised that my question is about public transportation. In past budgets, there were specific dollars for TPW, I think, to improve sidewalks and connectivity and working in collaboration with Trinity Metro to make all of that easier. As someone who got glass in her shoe walking from my bus stop to my house the other day, I'm very interested in this. So I don't see that as a called out item. I think twice in budgets before we did $600,000 specifically for that. I do see Complete Streets Vision $0. So I'm assuming that's
And safe routes to school is all, or safe routes overall. I think that's all part of it.
Do you know the dollar amount that is going towards that?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I think we can quickly look. It's rolled up in TPW's PAYGO, and it would have grown by 3.5% to 4%. So we did not reduce it that I recall. So I will check and make sure.
Yeah. So the bulk, as somebody mentioned, that streets need a lot of help. The bulk of the growth of PAYGO, and the reason why we had the growth in the overall valuation, we kept the tax rate associated with PAYGO the same, so we could capture as much as possible, so it could go to those uses.
Sure. Also in TPW, we are partnering with Trinity Metro on, the bus pad improvement project, and so about $1 million is going towards that every year.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question, probably for you. Do we have any sort of accounting in what legislative actions have cost us at the city this year? Particularly, I'm worried about, because I know you guys have been working on impact fees a lot. Is that going to cost us, actually?
Yes.
Indeed.
So probably the biggest one is going to cost us next year. The state passed a law that shifted or increased the amount of exemption to personal property for businesses. So businesses have a personal property exemption up to $2,500. It was originally put in place for small businesses. They said they're just helping more small businesses, but they raised it to $125,000. And so that not a lot of small businesses, an attorney or a person that does, small business doesn't typically have that much personal property that's on the tax rolls. But that will cost us about $8.5 million next year. It doesn't go in effect until January, so it's in the next appraisal cycle. So we'll be going into next year's budget looking at how do we fund the difference. And that was some of those issues were part of the whole, Christiane mentioned that on the front end, I asked departments to try to tighten their belts, start off with a 1% reduction from the previous year, and then also look at packages that included a 3% reduction. It was a combination of those things that we're going to be impacted over time with on some of those bills, and then also the fact that TAD wasn't reappraising. And so on the existing tax base, really that growth of 3.4%, most of that was tied to commercial and or rental homes that don't have that exemptions. Most of if you're in Tarrant County, like I have a homestead exemption, my number didn't move. If you protested, TAD was pretty much agreeing to up to 10 to 15% reduction in your tax rate. So with the small tax reduction that we're providing, you'll have a less bill from the city. And if you protested and got your rate even lower, your appraisal lower, it's going to be even a bigger reduction. But all that to say is we don't have an exact number. I know that number off the top of my head because that's the one I was worried about. But it's over time, and part of it is dependent on the type of growth we have and how much growth comes in and those kind of things to really get to an exact number.
Yes, I was wondering if it's in the budget for nuisance abatement for some of the property owners that are becoming repeat offenders, where the police are called often every weekend or something like that. Is that going to be in the budget, or is that something that has to come up later on with the city to have maybe a task force that's sole purpose is for the nuisance abatement, or working with a nonprofit like ACT to sue these property owners?
So we do have a nuisance abatement program in place, but there are some properties around the city that specifically kind of know how to play the game. And so when they get in trouble and they start going toward, they come in and make enough improvements so that then even if we file a suit from the city side, the judge pulls it off because they've made enough improvements, but then they go back to the same thing. And I mentioned on Saturday's meeting that one of the things that I'd like to bring forward to the city council is more of a dedicated group of folks from various departments to specifically target those areas or those properties. And I'll give you an example: Echo Motel in East Lancaster, or Rockies on South Hemp Hill, where we can provide kind of constant pressure of they need to clean up and they need to do better on the people that go there and the things that they allow to happen there. And so we're actually just working on putting that together. Hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll be able to bring something forward to the city council to approve that program, because there is no funding in the budget. That's not part of this budget, but we'd be looking to find a way to fund that. Because one of the things is that it's going to require off hours work by city employees, and they have their normal job. And police and fire have overtime, but general employees basically don't. And so I'd like to create an opportunity for them so that they have an incentive to stay longer, so they get paid at overtime versus just getting comp time. And we have limits on those kind of things. So it's really going to take a concerted effort and see if we can make a difference in those areas, and then we could expand it from those that are the most, egregious, that's what I want to say, egregious offenders that we have there. So thanks for the bunt there. Any other questions? All right, we all get to get home in time to watch Monday Night Football and see whether or not the new coach of the Chicago Bears makes a difference. Thank you all for coming out.